TaxAct can think of a million things more fun than filing taxes. TaxAct is going to name some now. Sitting in traffic. Folding a fitted bedsheet. Listening to your coworker talk about his fantasy team. Digging a hole. Digging an even larger hole next to that original hole. Unfortunately, TaxAct's filing software can't make taxes fun. But TaxAct can help you get them done. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
This week I'm talking about how assertiveness can improve your mental health and your relationships. So, let's talk about mental health. This is Let's Talk About Mental Health, a weekly podcast about mental health and wellbeing, hosted by Jeremy Godwin. Let's talk about mental health, because the more we talk about it, the easier it gets. Hello and welcome to episode 45 of Let's Talk About Mental Health, the weekly podcast full of simple ideas to help you improve your mental health and well-being. I'm Jeremy Godwin. Thank you for joining me. This episode is all about assertiveness, so let's get talking. Now, just quickly before I begin today, if you haven't already signed up to receive updates in your email, please take a moment to head over to letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/subscribe. You'll be alerted when new episodes land, plus I have lots of exciting stuff coming up over the next few months, which will be announced exclusively to my mailing list before anywhere else. So make sure you're included at letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au/subscribe. Now, on with this week's episode. I'm an Australian, in case you couldn't already tell, and we tend to be a fairly assertive lot in that most of us will usually tell it like it is, and we're pretty direct when we need to be. Now, of course, that is a stereotype, and there are all different types of people in this country, so to say that we're all assertive is probably a bit unfair. But regardless of where you're from or what your dominant style is, be it assertive, aggressive, or passive, what we all have in common is a need to be heard and to be understood. One of the big challenges in getting our message across to others is making sure that our needs are met and our feelings are respected, which is a very challenging proposition in a world of more than 7.8 billion people. Every time we interact with someone, regardless of whether they're a friend, family member, work colleague, general acquaintance, or total stranger, we're shaping our future interactions based on what we will and won't accept within that current interaction. And that's where assertiveness can help you to better manage your relationships in order to help you maintain good mental health. So what is assertiveness? Assertiveness is behaving confidently and communicating your needs, wants, feelings, beliefs, and opinions in an open and honest way while still being respectful of other people and their needs and not intentionally hurting anyone's feelings. And that definition is adapted from an article in Better Health Victoria, which I'll include the link to in the transcript. Now, I often take a moment somewhere in the episode to mention what the topic isn't about, and today I'm going to be doing that much earlier on by sharing a quote from that same article that I just mentioned. And the quote is, "Some people confuse assertiveness with aggression and think that to assert yourself is to adopt a particular position in a disagreement, stand your ground, and argue a point without compromise." Again, the link for that's in the transcript. So let's be completely clear here that being assertive is not about being completely inflexible and never compromising, because that means you're just not prepared to grow and evolve as a person. What it means is that you ask for what you need through your words and actions, whilst also respecting the needs of others. Assertiveness has a couple of close relatives who I mentioned before. There's aggressiveness, which is being openly hostile and forceful towards others, and passiveness, which is allowing things to be said to you or things to be done that impact on you without responding or resisting. And then there's also passive aggression, which is avoiding direct and honest communication whilst behaving in a hostile or sarcastic manner. For example, I'm sure many of us are familiar with maybe one of our parents or a relative saying something along the lines of, "Well, that's your decision, and if you want to break my heart, then go ahead and do what you like," or something equally obnoxious disguised as being supportive. I think these are all summed up quite nicely with a really great quote by the author, psychologist, and Holocaust survivor Edith Eger that goes, "To be passive is to let others decide for you. To be aggressive is to decide for others. To be assertive is to decide for yourself. And to trust that there is enough, that you are enough." The problem with these other types of non-assertive behaviors like passiveness, aggressiveness, and passive aggression is that somebody often gets hurt. And our interactions with one another don't need to be about who wins or loses or who has power over another person. Assertiveness is about being kind and treating others fairly and equally, as well as ensuring that you are treated fairly and equally. I've used the saying, as within, so without, quite a few times before in this podcast, and assertiveness is basically as without, so within, in the sense that how you move about the world and conduct your interactions with others will then go a long way towards your internal well-being. Why? Because when you ask for and receive equal and fair treatment from others, you'll then be more inclined to value yourself and treat yourself fairly as well. You know, sometimes I sit here researching and writing these episodes and I find myself thinking about just how much these topics fit in with not just mental health, but also the broader world. Again, it's that as within, so without thing. You know, we're seeing more and more people around the world demand to be treated equally, and why shouldn't they? Why wouldn't we all want to be treated the same? And why would anybody want to deny someone else from being treated fairly and equally, except to maintain their own power and push their own narrow-minded agendas? If we want to have good mental health, then we need to think carefully about the way we treat ourselves, as well as the way we treat others, because they're all interwoven. We can't reasonably expect to be treated well by others if we don't treat other people well. Anyway, look, I digress, but this is something I feel pretty strongly about, and I think we need to stop putting mental health and social well-being into separate boxes, because everything is connected. Anyway, let's move on to why is assertiveness important for good mental health. Assertiveness helps your mental health because it's about respecting yourself. It's a form of self-care in that it involves being clear about what you need and communicating your needs and feelings to others. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're right or that you will always get your own way, but it means that you're able to ensure that you get your message across in a calm and rational way so that you can work towards a mutually agreeable solution. It involves acting in your own best interests and standing up for yourself, as well as making your own choices for your life. According to Psychology Today Australia, assertiveness is associated with higher self-esteem and confidence, allows you to stand up for yourself or others in a non-aggressive way, can protect you from bullies and other social predators, and leads to less anxiety and depression, as well as better relationships and a greater sense of agency. In other words, being in greater control of your life. And I'll include the link to that in the transcript. So, working on your assertiveness has a lot of benefits because it can help you to establish and maintain fairer and more equal relationships at work, at home, with friends, and even out in the world. For example, being comfortable in telling that tradesperson who never shows up when they're supposed to that you're going to terminate their contract. And yes, I am speaking from current personal experience here. It can also help you to feel comfortable and confident in expressing your opinions without worrying about whether or not others will agree with you, but while also respecting every person's right to their own opinion. It can help you to feel more comfortable saying no to others and yes to your own needs, and to establish clear boundaries and stick to them. So with all of that in mind, let's get into the how-to part of this week's episode. How to be more assertive every day. I've got a few different points to cover this week, and it's less of a step-by-step process than it is a number of different things for you to consider. So let's start with being clear on your needs. Know who you are and what you need from the people around you, and be clear about what needs are being met versus those that are not being met. Because when our needs go unfulfilled, we tend to run into a host of issues like stress, anxiety, depression, etc. So it's really important to be honest with yourself and to identify where you might need to do some work to ensure that your needs are being met. Next, be consistent and treat others the way you want to be treated. You can look at it as leading by example, and it works for a whole range of situations. For example, I've explained to most, if not all, of the closest people in my life that if they send me a message, it will very likely take me a few days or even a couple of weeks to see the message. Now, I set that expectation because, look, I'm pretty busy with my work, and I also have notifications completely switched off because I hate them. And I mean hate them. Having reminders and alerts pop up absolutely sends my anxiety into overdrive. And so because I've done that, it means that I need to go in and manually check my messages, which, to be very honest, is something that I only do maybe every week or every other week for Messenger and Facebook, because I hate them too. My sincere apologies to any of you who love Facebook, and I fully respect your choice, each to their own, but Facebook drives me nuts. However, getting back to my point, there is one, I swear. When I do see a message, I will usually try to respond to it on the spot, because there's nothing worse than seeing that someone has read a message but hasn't responded to it. So my point here is, think about how you want to be treated and then treat others the way that you want to be treated. Which brings me nicely to my next point. Address issues early and be honest, unapologetic, and calm. So if you're feeling some type of way about something, you may find that it's better to get it out than to let it fester internally. But there are two very different ways to go about letting it out. You can either go completely gung-ho with zero thought for the other person's feelings, like a bull in a china shop, which is quite likely to cause a lot of damage. Or, more effectively, you can take the time to think about what you might need to say, and then how you can deliver your message in a calm and non-judgmental way, which of course is a much kinder and fairer way to tackle any situation. Honesty is important, in other words, saying what you mean and meaning what you say, but it's also about being thoughtful in your delivery, so that it remains kind. In other words, without judgment or accusations, because they just serve to create conflict. Further, don't apologize for being honest. As long as you're being kind, respectful, and thoughtful, you do not need to apologize. Let me talk you through an example of what I mean. I have two different friends who I love deeply, but who are both horrendous with responding to messages. I'm talking reading the message and then not replying for weeks afterwards. There are 4 different ways that I could handle that type of situation. I could be passive, so I could just send messages to them anyway, hoping that they'll eventually respond without ever actually addressing my feelings about the situation. I could be aggressive, so for example, I could send them nasty messages telling them off, or if I wanted to be super aggressive, I could go round to their house and yell at them. Third, I could be passive-aggressive, so that could involve giving them the silent treatment, and then when they do eventually get in touch, just dancing around the subject. Or, fourth, I could be assertive, so I could address the situation calmly and logically by explaining the impact of their actions without judgment, and give them an opportunity to then modify their behaviour, which is what I did, by the way. And before I continue here, and this is totally a sidetrack note, can I just say here that in this example, I'm talking about someone taking weeks to respond, not just an hour or two. Assertiveness does not mean being pushy or demanding. Please respect that other people are not just sitting there waiting to respond to their messages as soon as they arrive. But when someone reads your message and then doesn't reply for days or weeks, that's a whole other story. And I think that should be addressed in a gentle yet assertive way. One of the challenges with dealing with other people is that we can often tend to jump to conclusions about their motivations, and we're not always correct. The thing is that you never know what another person's intentions are. And there's a big difference between doing something or not doing something deliberately versus unintentionally. I tend to give most people the benefit of the doubt, and I've found that most of the time when you calmly and kindly explain how what has happened has affected you, they will generally respond with genuine remorse and will resolve to do better next time. And that's really all you want, because the past cannot be changed. I talk often in Let's Talk About Mental Health about the fact that you can't control other people, and you can't. However, you can influence people and situations through having open, honest, and non-judgmental conversations that come from a place of love and shared humanity. I firmly believe that most people don't set out to be mean or inconsiderate. It's just that sometimes we forget to think about how our actions are impacting on other people. So it's up to us to be more forgiving, whilst also not letting ourselves be taken advantage of. Which brings me to my next point: address patterns early and be direct. In the words of the writer Ian Fleming, who created the James Bond series, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, the third time it's enemy action. Now, the term enemy action might be going a little far there, but it's definitely true that when the same thing happens 3 times, it's no longer a coincidence, but instead a pattern of behaviour, and patterns need to be addressed. It's the old root cause versus symptom thing that I talk about a lot in this program. If someone's behaving the same way towards you over and over again, and if you've been addressing it and nothing is changing, then something deeper is happening, and that needs to be addressed. If someone pretends not to know that they're being thoughtless towards you, but then they keep on doing it even after you've addressed it a couple of times, then they know exactly what they're doing. And so no amount of covering the same ground over and over again is going to change things unless you get to the bottom of what's really going on. How do you do that assertively? You ask. Yep, I know it's confronting to even have to think about. However, if you don't address it, then nothing will change. And if nothing changes, then nothing changes. So my next point is be flexible. Assertiveness is not about being right, it's about being heard. If you argue without being prepared to be flexible and compromising where you need to, then you're being aggressive. Or if you back right down or even give up completely, you're being passive. Or if you back down for a bit and then go around telling everyone how terrible the other person is, you're being passive-aggressive and actually a bit of an asshole as well. So be flexible. Also, be clear about your intentions. If you're addressing an issue, are you addressing an issue to create drama or to get your own way? If your intention is anything other than to find a mutually agreeable solution, there's a problem. Which leads me to my next point: remember that balance is the goal in all things. And that means honouring your needs and the needs of the other person. Sometimes that might mean that you need to meet in the middle. Compromise is not settling, it's about finding a win-win for both parties, or at the very least avoiding a lose-lose. Negotiation is not a dirty word, and there is balance to be found in all situations. Speaking of, my next point is to keep it factual and avoid blame statements. So if you're talking to somebody else, stick to the facts. You'll see a lot of advice recommending that if you need to address something with someone, that you structure your approach around saying things like, when you do this action, I feel this feeling because whatever the reason is, and I would prefer, and then state your preference. So I'll give you an example of that in practice. When you talk over me after I ask you not to, I feel devalued because I start wondering if what I have to say really matters. I'd prefer that you let me finish what I'm saying before you talk, so I have a chance to explain my point fully. So just think about how you position things so that it comes across as assertive, and it's about walking that line between assertiveness versus passiveness or aggressiveness. And can I just say that when you do this, it's essential to avoid blame and to make sure that you don't make sweeping generalizations like, you always do this or you never do this. Nobody does or doesn't do something 100% of the time. And it's about as helpful as telling someone to calm down. And my next point is to know your worth. I talked about this a lot back in episode 43, self-esteem, so check that out. But also let me say that you are unique, you are valuable, and you have something important to contribute to the world. So never let anybody take that away from you, ever. And finally, here are 4 general points to keep in mind. First, don't let yourself be taken advantage of or be mistreated by others. I once had a new manager who I bumped into in the airport, and he pushed in front of me at the bar, and I let him, even though I was quite taken aback and I wanted to tell him to piss off. And because I did that, it completely changed our working relationship for the worse from that moment onwards, because he had asserted his dominance and I had let him. It's ridiculous the games some people play. But remember that it does take two to tango. So you can choose whether or not to allow others to take away your power, and you can choose to assertively address issues. My second point here is that if you can't respond assertively and kindly in the moment, take a break and come back to it. I just did that with a friend and I ended up taking 3 weeks because I needed to sort out some stuff about how I was feeling. And so when I did come back to her, I was really honest about what had taken me so long, which actually led to a better conversation. So if you need to take a break, take a break. Probably not 3 weeks, but you know. My third general point is to remember that we are all unique, so each to their own. If it's not harming anyone, let people get on with their lives. Different is not wrong, it's just different. You don't have to like it, and you don't even have to agree with it, but you can choose to be an adult and just let people be. Focus on what really matters in life, doing no harm, being kind, and giving more than you take. And then my fourth and final general point here is to pick your battles. Not everything has to be turned into a confrontation, because that's actually aggression. And sometimes the most assertive thing that you can do is to change the way that you approach the situation. Sometimes that means to walk away. Remember that all you have direct control over are your own words, actions, and feelings. Because when it comes to assertiveness and mental health, what it all boils down to is this. Assertiveness is a choice. It's a choice that you make to look after your needs and feelings in a way that also respects the needs and feelings of other people. You may not be able to control other people, but you can certainly influence how they behave towards you by assertively addressing issues if and when they occur. Some people will find it confronting or uncomfortable when you're assertive towards them, but that's their issue, not yours. Be respectful and be mindful of not hurting other people's feelings, but that doesn't mean stepping back and becoming passive, because then nothing will be achieved. When you are assertive, you're making it clear to others and to yourself that your needs matter, which they do. And when you do that, you begin to take much greater control of your life. Each week, I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the week's topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is by Eleanor Roosevelt, and it is, "Nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent." Let me repeat that. Nobody can make you feel inferior without your consent. Alright, that's nearly it for this week. Next week, I'll be talking about gratitude. I'm not sure that a single episode of Let's Talk About Mental Health has gone by without me mentioning the notion of gratitude at least once, except maybe this week. So I thought it was probably about time that I gave the topic its own episode. And what better time to do it than now, since September is Mindset Month here on Let's Talk About Mental Health. So next week, I'll be talking about what gratitude is and what it isn't, why it's important for good mental health, and I'll be sharing simple ideas for how to incorporate more gratitude into your life every day. I hope you'll join me for that episode, which will be released on Monday morning in Australia and New Zealand, Sunday evening in the UK, Ireland and Europe, and Sunday afternoon in the US and Canada. You can find past episodes and additional content at the website, which is letstalkaboutmentalhealth.com.au. And you can also find Let's Talk About Mental Health on Instagram, Facebook, and Pinterest at LTA Mental Health, as well as on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform and tell someone you know about the show, because word of mouth really helps new people to discover the program. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time.